In the last lesson, we defined the consumption function. We defined what it was, how you calculate it, how you calculate things such as the marginal propensity to consume, as well as what the autonomous consumption is. In this particular video, we are going to talk a little bit about the fact that a consumption function can move. That's known as a shift. So first and foremost, let's identify what's the difference between a shift and a movement. You see a shift, it creates a brand new relationship. Or in layman's terms, it basically moves the whole line. Whereas before, you might have this point, and you see all of this is a relationship. It's a relationship. Each one of these lines is a relationship between disposable personal income and consumption expenditures. It's saying at a series of different disposable personal incomes, there's a series of different consumption expenditures. But it's a relationship. And we could say that at a disposable income of $1,000, we see that there is roughly, about a little over $2,000 worth of consumption. We can see that at an income of $2,000, there's more like $3,000 worth of consumption. So it's a relationship. And you could actually plot this out on a table where you say DPI is on one side, and you have all of the various levels of disposable personal income. And then on the other side of this table, you have consumption. And then you have the corresponding amounts at each level of disposable personal income. So it's a relationship. Now, whenever you have a shift, it creates a brand new relationship, and it moves that whole line. And we can see that here, as this is a shift upwards, or a shift, it could also say it's a shift inwards. But it's moving upwards. And you can see that at a level of $2,000 of disposable income, we did have, about a little over, or right at $3,000 worth of consumption. Now, at the same level of disposable income, under this new shift, we have closer to, say, $37,000 worth of consumption going on. Let's look at the income of $3,000. Before, we had roughly right around $37,000 worth of income. Now we have over $4,000, about $4,200 worth of consumption going on, and it's still at the same level of income. So what it was is we used to have if we set up our table again, we used to have this relationship where it was at a series of different levels of disposable income. We had different levels of consumption, corresponding levels of consumption. Now, after we shift that line, we have a new level of consumption. So we have these new levels going on. So it's still a relationship, but now it is a different relationship than what it was. It is a new relationship, and it's showing a shift in the line. We have a new relationship. The same levels of disposable income now corresponds with a new level of consumption, that new relationship. But on the other hand, if you have a movement is where it moves along the line, does not change the relationship. So if you say, well, I was at an income of $3,000 and now I'm making $4,000. Well, your consumption, yeah, it increased, but you don't have a brand new relationship. It's just saying that you have more money to spend. So a movement, it'll move along one of these lines, but it won't jump the line. So we could have a movement along either line, either this new consumption or the old consumption. It could be going an increase in income from $2,000 here up to $3,000 here. That would be a movement along that line. The only time you ever have a new relationship is if you have a new, basically, disposable income and consumption expenditure setup. If you only move, or you only have a shift whenever the whole line changes. But if you're just moving along the line, that is just known as a movement. That's not a shift. So a change in disposable personal income will cause a movement along the line. So if your income is changing, then you're going to have a movement along this line. But if other things change, other determinants will cause a shift of the consumption function. Well, these other determinants might be something like an increase in wealth or expectations. So an increase in wealth, if there's an increase in wealth, then that might encourage the person to spend a higher percentage of their income on goods. Rather than saving some, they're willing to spend more of it. So let's say that they have an increase in wealth, and that kind of triggers them to say, you know what, I have enough money in reserves, I have enough wealth, I can spend more of it. And I might still only be making $3,000 every year or something like that, or my income still might only be $3,000. But because I have so much in reserves and my wealth and I have so much liquid assets that I can afford to spend more of my paycheck, more of my salary of say $3,000. So before, you might have been trying to save money and do all that, so you were spending that higher percentage. So before, that was a bad straight line, sorry about that. So before, you were only willing to spend a little less than 4,000, about 35,000 or 3,500 or something like that. Now all of a sudden, because you have an increase in wealth and you're not as worried about saving as much money, or you feel that you can afford to spend more money, even though you're still only making this $3,000, you're now spending a higher amount. So this increase in wealth might encourage a person to spend a higher percentage of their income. Another one that will shift this consumption function that we mentioned earlier is this expectations. So its expectations will affect how much a household will save. Just stop and think about your future. Do you expect certain things to happen in your future? You might be expecting to get out of college and find a job, or you might already have a job, and you might be expecting to go to, say, full-time at that job. Well, if you're expecting to go full-time, or if you're expecting a raise, or if you're just expecting things to go right, you might be willing to spend more now. What about this? Just think about this. What if you're expecting to receive a raise next month? Not this month, but next month. Haven't received that raise yet, but you're expecting a higher pay come next month, and you might want to go out and celebrate. You say, well, I don't need to save that money this month because, well, I'm going to be able to make that and then some next month. So as a result, you go out and you splurge a little bit and you wind up spending more. So positive expectations of things like higher pay, less taxes, things like that will encourage you to actually go out there and spend more even though your income really hasn't changed. Remember, you're only expecting a higher pay. Or let's say you're worried about the future. You're worried about losing your job. Well, even though you have it, your income hasn't changed yet, you might be willing to save more because you're worried about the future. So positive expectations are going to encourage you to spend more. Negative expectations will probably encourage you to save more and spend less, meaning that there would be actually an inward shift or an outward shift where you would actually see this line go down here, where now at say $2,000, you're only willing to spend that much as opposed to that much. That makes sense. You expect things to go right for the future, you're willing to spend more. If you expect things to possibly go downhill in the future, you might be worried about your future, so you're not spending near as much money to try and save that. So, in talking about a shift, if we look at this graph, and I know we've kind of already reiterated it, but I'm going to go over it again. You see, consumption, or if we look at just this disposable personal income of $4,000, just right here, we can always see that's a shift because our disposable personal income hasn't changed, but yet we went from spending $4,300 to $5,000. The amount we're spending has increased, but yet disposable income has not changed. That's known as a shift. It's an that's an inward shift, that's an upward shift in this example. But if we went the other way, what if we had negative expectations and income still hasn't changed, but now we've actually shifted downward, we've shifted outward, and our income or our consumption actually falls while our income stays the same. That's the way you can always tell if it's a shift. If your income is staying the same, but yet the amount you spend has changed. So we talked about how an increase in wealth might encourage people to actually spend more. Well, what is actually wealth in terms of a household sector? Household sector wealth. That wealth is generally allocated by the holding of liquid assets. And the more liquid assets you hold, it might change and it helps with formulating spending plans. You see, the more liquid assets you hold, it means that the more basically money you have in reserve. So you might be willing to spend more today because you know you have enough in reserve if, say, the future does go bad. If you're kind of a risk-adverse person and now you've got enough liquid assets to where you're worried about the future going downhill, but you've got enough kind of banked in those liquid assets that you're not really all that worried about it. So you might be willing to spend more if you're holding more of those liquid assets out of your paycheck because you have that kind of that fail-safe, that safeguard, that trampoline to catch you in case you fall off the high wire. So what exactly is a liquid asset? A liquid asset is either cash or assets that can be easily converted into cash with little or no penalty. So stuff like stocks and bonds, those can be easily converted into cash, often with little to no penalty. Savings accounts at your local bank or things like that are often considered liquid assets, because you can often think about this. If you have money in your savings account, you can just go withdraw that money out of your savings account and use that as if it were cash today, right? Well, that is a liquid asset. Money markets, mutual funds, those are considered liquid assets. Things that can be easily converted into cash are liquid assets.